the housing is referred to in the heritage report. And it says as you know, the memorial avenues also relate to the range of housing types within the streets, some of which are consistently characteristic of a particular age and style. Does that apply to Windermere?
Yes, it does. We've got that bungalow at 110 Windermere Road that Dr. Williams specifically mentioned. He's also mentioned in his book that there was sort of housing dating from the 1880s. There are older houses in the streets still, and there are obviously modern houses as well. But you know, there are a number of additional houses still. It's been something that has grown over time.
We've done a brief site visit, and we may look at another one. If we did, are there any areas that you could identify?
Well, I think you should start at the church. And if you've got the planting schedule that's annexed to the submission, it would be an interesting day to go through that and have a look at the specific trees. I'd ask you to look at the, for example, around St. James Avenue. There's an awful lot of parking pressure and how that's being dealt with, and look at the tree welfare in relation to that, and also on Windermere Road to be looking at the parking, just the sheer traffic density that we've got going through there. But if you also took time to look at the type of trees, they were specifically chosen. Each avenue's got a type of tree depending on where to reflect a battle. You know, that took some thought and care, and I think it would be an interesting day to see that. I think there could be a great deal done for the avenues in terms of information for the public, plants to be in the area. It's a fascinating thing, and I know they teach about it at Waimaki Primary around the corner, but a lot of people probably aren't aware of it.
What's your sense of the general awareness and understanding, and I guess level of potential support for recognition with the people that live around that area?
Yeah, they were very. There's been quite a few submissions. I know there were a lot of people that are quite concerned about it. I think somehow it feels like we're sort of constantly under pressure about this issue, and I think some people have got fatigued by that. But there was certainly an awful lot of people in 2016 who still live in the area that were concerned, and I think they can't possibly, perhaps not quite sure why we've ended up here again. But it's certainly something that is valued in the area, and I know that, for example, it was taught when my children were at Māori school about the nature of avenues and how the people pay £1 to buy a tree as a family of the dead, and you know how the significance of it. And certainly there's a parade every Anzac Day, and there's a memorial rose garden at St. James Park as well.
So it's been very helpful.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Now, Papanui, the heritage group. Your support network's arrived.
Yes.
Oh, am I late?
No, you're perfectly on time. Have a seat. As I say, you would have heard my question to you earlier. I don't know whether you have material you wish us to receive that we don't already have, or whether you've got a submission that you want to read or present to us. What's your
We did a written submission.
Yes, we've got that.
But it's very short. As Philippa says, I think you're getting a bit fatigued. This is the fourth submission we've had in recent years.
Yes.
But I have also prepared a summary statement.
We've got that, which was corrected this morning. We've received it.
Yes.
Okay. So we've got that amended version.
Yes.
Oh, sorry, people.
No, that's fine.
More support.
Yeah. Bring it forward if you wish. So you're going to just read this through or present this to us?
Let's read the first page and then if it's going
That's fine. However, whatever works for you, and then we'll, in the same fashion as we've just seen, we'll very likely have questions we want to ask me. All right.
Okay.
Are you happy if we ask questions as they arise, or why this thing through?
Sometimes it breaks people's flow and they lose all train of thought, but it actually suits us a lot easier because it's in our mind. So if that works for you, we'll do that. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, so, thank you for the opportunity. We really welcome another opportunity to support and endorse the proposal to list the 15 Memorial Avenues plus children. And our hope is that there will be greater knowledge, awareness and understanding of the significance of the Memorial Avenues, and that will lead on to be protection for them in the future. And we also support the recommendation that Amanda Oates made yesterday in her statement of primary evidence that the name of the heritage item be clarified to show that the road reserves are included along with the trees and the plants, because the road reserves are obviously really important for the health of the trees. And many of the previous submissions that have been made about the avenues in the past have drawn attention to the damage that can be done to the trees through cars parking on the berms, but also increased volume of traffic. And as Philippa's just been mentioning, there's been an obvious increase in traffic on Windermere Road in recent years because of the greatly enlarged residential retirement village and the Youth and Community Development Centre Te Ora Hau. And St James Avenue too is noticeably busier as motorists cut through from Windermere Road to Dyhrberg. I mean, these are, as Philippa says, these are quiet residential tree-lined streets which were intended not to have a lot of traffic on them. And of course, as I mentioned a bit further on, if the population in the streets increase, that's even more traffic and more people around. So we support all the other Papanui submitters who have also endorsed the avenues, apart from one, including Philippa. And we, in the view that we need to look at the avenues as a whole, not just trees, but as a space where they're symbolic but visual reminder of World War II, and they should be treated with the same respect as other memorials. And as Philippa's pointed out, the streets were chosen because they were side streets and because they were quiet, not major routes. So it's totally against the intention of these streets to make them into busy roads. And she also reminds us of the statement by our group's former chairman, Dr. Murray Williams, who gave evidence at the 2016 Independent Hearing Panel, when he said that the Memorial Avenues were an effective way to beautify the suburb, while also suggesting themes of reflection and regeneration. And I brought along the book. This is the book which the Papanui Heritage Group published, and the main author was Dr. Williams. So this is just one of the publications that we've done as a group. Not me, I can't claim any contribution to this work at all. I'm a fairly recent newcomer to the group, but in the past, the group's done a huge amount of research and published numerous of these small booklets about the area. These are the Papanui Heritage Trail leaflets that they've produced. And there's a sizable section in the Papanui Library where there's a whole bookcase dedicated to research material that the group's produced. So it's been a very active group in terms of researching, recording and promoting Papanui history and heritage. So we just support all the other residents who have argued for the ongoing protection and preservation of the avenues and the dangers posed by the rezoning of the area. And we regret that the Independent Hearing Panel of 2016 now seems to have been overturned by this PC14 process. And while we realise that this is not about PC14 today, you can't think about their future without also thinking about the impact of desertification of housing in the area. And we were really disappointed that three of the Memorial Avenues, St James, Windermere and Gambier Street, which is on the other side of Papanui Road, are currently in the HRZ, the high density residential zone. And as Philippa said, that means 2 of those streets are adjacent to St Paul's Church and St James Park, which is the kind of historic heart of Papanui. And then on the other side of Papanui Road, near Gambier Street, there are 8 of the avenues on the other side of the road. And there are also tree-lined streets there which are not memorial avenues, but they still add to the whole atmosphere and the ambience of the area. So I'm going to hand over to Clifford now.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I'm reasonably a new chum with Papanui Heritage, but looking back at the various submissions, including 2016 that Philippa was involved in, but I got in touch with the Papanui RSA and they made a presentation in front of the Parents Committee. The President, Doug Francis, I'll leave this with you for evidence because we don't just want to look at problems, there's sort of some solutions in there as well. He a bit of background on the RSA, but most community has a World War I memorial and it's usually possible to add names later conflicts and provide a surrogate tomb. In 1947, Harry Tillman, president of the Christchurch Beautifying Association, arranged for service groups and RSA to establish trees in 15 streets in the Papanui area as a memorial to those who died in World War II. He sought funding from families in the locality of 15 shillings each per tree for the project. I also believe that the Papanui Suburban RSA provided funding of 10 shillings per tree as well. Residents of various streets have applied to have their street included in the project, and after selection, 15 streets were selected. Throughout this, he uses the term living memorials, and I think that's a good one in terms of saying what they are. You know, memorial avenues might be a bit of a wider definition. So the executive of the Papanui RSA met. They fully support the living memorials continue to be protected. However, we do realise that oak trees are now almost 100 years old and causing considerable damage to underground facilities. So acknowledges that. If the trees are to be removed for remedial work to be done to the sewer and other facilities in these streets, then we would insist that on completion of this work, other mature trees, possibly native, be replanted in their place to allow the memorial to live on. And there's a good example of Condell Avenue that Margaret talked about, the rest home there, that the trees were just removed on both sides. I live in one of the memorial avenues, Tones Road, and I don't know whether it's the council, but I've noticed they've put protective fencing around a tree. Originally, the architectural plans were to remove that tree to have the garage straight ahead, but they've now got a drive that they have to swing into the drive. So it's good seeing the council doing that, but there's a thing that I'm not too sure how right this is, but the plaques, the brass plaques on the corner of the streets, Mr. Douglas thought that the council had removed them. So I must point out that also each of the streets has a memorial plaque attached to signage at both ends of the street. Some time ago, they were removed by council workers, and some of them returned to the RSA without explanation or reason. I also respectfully request that these plaques be reinstated at the council cost as they were removed by them. I think one of the things that we thought maybe they were people wanting to get the brass metal. I think in terms of the plaques, they're actually quite hard to read, and I'd like a suggestion. I prefer, there's some very good storyboards on the pioneering and also the tangata whenua stories around Papanui that were done by the instigation of Murray and others. And it'd be quite good to see actually the memorial story told, rather than just a little plaque that's hard to read. Margaret referred to that map too, and we're looking at updating that for people walking there, but also for schools. And there's a lot of Papanui, and Dennis Mercury has just turned up, with the Bridgestone Reserve. So there's a lot of history in there for schools to look at, and we're looking at, even though it's a costly exercise, of getting that digitally so we can see that Mitre 10 there was sanitarium factory there, or some of the buildings that have disappeared, and we're going to talk to City Council and Library to see if they can help us with that project. So it's a very rich heritage of pre-European history and European history that we'd like to. Yeah, and he's listed the memorial avenues. As I say, I like that term, living memorials. So there's Alpha Avenue, Clement Avenue, Condell Avenue, Dormer Street, Gambier Street, Holden Street, Hartley Avenue, Kenmore Street, Lansbury Avenue, Norfolk Street, Perry Street, Scottston Avenue, St James Avenue, Tones Road, Windermere Road. And I think in the area of St James Park, where there's a lot of where that new housing development's gone along beside the railway, that already it was almost inevitable that trees have been chopped there to let light in, and probably been, I don't know whether it's done by council or people wanting a bit more light inside their houses, but that would be good again if there were sort of storyboards up there telling that story. Right, so in summary, the 15 living memorials must be recorded the same status and protection of other stone memorials, as they are in fact parts of areas marks of respect to the fallen. Anything less would be sacrilege against the memory of our fallen servicemen and women, not only in these two conflicts, but also those that may have followed. And then he ends, I end with the ode is how we remember the fallen. I'll leave that.
If you would, thank you.
Yeah, because I think that's very good.
Sorry, could I just say,
Sure.
there's one pattern here which I thought was quite important, really. But the idea for living memorials came from the governor. Yeah. The concept of living memorials came from the centennial celebrations 1840 to 1940 and was led by the government minister responsible. It was felt that there were enough stone monuments, and anyone knew that should be living memorials in the form of trees, blanket rooms, community halls, etc. So that was interesting.
If you leave that with us. In terms of anything further, you want to add to it? Or?
No, I mean, we've already got ideas about where the storyboards could go.
You'll appreciate we've got limited ability to influence some of this in terms of what our mandate is, but
just want to make clear that we continue to keep working in the whole area of aiming to protect and preserve the memorial avenues, and we see storyboards as one way of doing this.
In terms of that protection, you see it as a whole, so the plaques and the trees.
And the road reserves and the whole atmosphere, I guess.
how many members do you have?
11. Where
Today. It's funny though, we do get, initially I think the organisation was for telling the stories and heritage, but we've sort of become a residential group by default almost. And I know I'm good friends with Brian Spear with St Albans, and they function heritage and residents association as well. So
It's purely a voluntary arrangement.
Yep.
And the funding for the initiatives such as those is all grant money or raised.
a steady income.
Business.
Yes.
Yeah, it's very well written up.
Yes. So that's the subscriptions. I think one of our members, Dennis, would like to.
It's a lovely bit of history group, it really is. I've been involved quite a few years.
Forward if you wish me.
Oh, okay.
Have you got a name? Any last name?
Yes,
Not me.
gotta leave that spelled.
Yeah, right. I can give them one of my cards.
I didn't think those things existed anymore.
Oh, no. Yeah, well, some are still pretty old fashioned.
I must say before Dennis talks too, is he's got numerous networks and Rotary and all sorts of other groups that he former head of social sciences at Papanui High, so he can enlist
Yes,
students.
the history goes on.
Feel free to say.
I mean, I seem to remember at a meeting we had Nigel Hampton came along.
You see, AC.
I played rugby with
Um,
him. Anyway,
Sorry, Neil, so I just interrupt you, but that 2022 meeting,
Yep.
the RSA president said that there was Hampton, I suppose KC now, plus Sarah Mallett and Duncan Webb came to that meeting and supported the submission. Yeah.
I mean, Nigel spoke great eloquence and talked about the whole area and growing up in the area and how important it was, the trees, especially in St James's, and problems with moving houses off those properties. So, I mean, it was really good what he had to say. The other thing I want to say is I just move a wee bit further out to the Papanui bush, and you've heard of that or not, or Bridgestone Reserve,
Yes.
which is on off Langlands Road, which was an area that was once a travel area for the Maori. Used to come through from Kaiapō through to Otautahi and kill their birds in the forest. And the forest was actually larger than Riccarton Bush. They saw two bushes when they came over. Riccarton, anyway, Papanui was bigger. Chopped down in 5 years. Kākatia, Totara, all went into town. Riccarton Bush remained and is now struggling actually. But we got a growing wood in here. We have lots of members of the public coming in and doing mahi in the bush. And I'm hoping one day to get some sort of heritage status on that area through here. We're right beside Braintree and we're right beside the cancer buildings. That lots of people come from all over the South Island. So that's really good. So that's also encompassing that this whole area that we're looking at within what we're doing. As far as the heritage of the area is concerned, it's just a nice, quiet oasis within Kmart and Northlands and all that.
Can I just add to something David said about the plaques? I believe at the moment there is a plaque on every street, but it's only one end.
Yeah, well, we heard yesterday, I think I got it right, I'll correct it, but it's not necessarily consistent throughout. There may be one at each end, there may be one. I don't know if there's any streets where there's a plaque missing. I'm not aware of that situation. But it is various.
Yes,
Yeah.
it does vary. And the Cumberland Avenue one is halfway up.
Right.
It's
After where the trees have been removed.
Yes, so, it's not readily obvious that this is Memorial Avenue by any means. I mean, they haven't always been well looked after, but it does vary quite a lot. If you go look at all of them, some of them are really lovely, and particularly where the supply burn with the trees on the burn, they're a lot better, a lot kind of helpful and happier looking ones where they're.
Rayburn Avenue's got the canopy across, and there have been studies done where I think in Sydney where temperatures can be 5 degrees less. So it's including trees in your infrastructure can be very, very beneficial. And there's another study which I can't quote exactly where it came from, but people that live in leafy suburbs are happy.
The other thing too is the local schools have been very involved and other schools come to the bush and look around. So this whole educational area. And if you look in the actual township of Papanui, right by the roundabout, there's a lovely mural in there of Anzac and stuff that was done by students of the school. So
And Dennis is working on a Matariki.
we want, that's another whole area we don't.
Yeah.
I don't want to pick it up today. It's too late now to get it up by now, unless they have a light show. But yeah, there's a beautiful wall, massive wall. I've got permission. It's all shovel ready to go. To put a Matariki some up there, and also a beautiful Kiraroo coming up here. Chat to the Murray Smith, the owner of the buildings, and it's all going. We've even got an artist from down to do it properly, and I'm wanting to get local graffiti artists in the area who put up unofficial stuff. But anyway, I'll get them involved so that they become guardians. And most of the schools, Papanui High School in particular, right beside us, all the students are guardians of the area. We've got lovely peace poles and that's Rotary Peace Poles. Basically, it's peace in our time. 2 of them, and they're written in 5 different languages.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. We don't have any further questions. I'm sorry, I'm jumping in here, but
No, I just have to say, I think I, for one, am much better informed in terms of the Memorial Avenue by your attendance. So appreciate it.
I've certainly learned something. I have too.
Yeah, it shows how quickly things are forgotten, but I think it's important for my grandkids and that to know what it's all about and the rich history of Papanui. Yeah.
Well done and good luck with your endeavours. Thank you very much. That's the single copy. What we just get there? We don't need to read it. There's such a photocopy that we can run that one. Thank you. Right. So, change or not? Sorry, get your name.
Yes, my name's Derek Wallace. I'll introduce myself in a minute.
Yeah, sure. Sorry. This Shand may or may not hear with or you.
Yes, Diana Shand wrote the original, put in the original submission for the Inner City West Neighbourhood Association, otherwise known as ICON. For short, I'm going to use the term
I'm familiar with that.
Yeah. And I mean, that was 3 years ago. And I just want to say that most of what I'm going to say is for better or worse directed towards the Section 32 report that Council has subsequently produced, and indeed the recent amendments to it, the further decisions relating to plan change 13.
Right. So this is, so you say Section 32 report. Do you mean that the report that's been prepared by the various council advisors, the 42
The
report?
one on the website.
Yes.
Yeah, Section 32. It's goes through 80 pages, goes through
Yes.
what I assume to be the council's proposals, having looked at submissions
Yes.
over the previous years.
I might be wrong, but I think what you're referring to is the council's report. This 42A report is
Is
correct.
it? I don't know where I got the section.
Section 32 is a relevant document,
Yeah,
but I
okay.
suspect you're referring to with the various recommendations of the council officers or advisors.
Okay, let's assume that. Extremely confusing.
No.
Yeah.
You're forgiven.
Yeah.
What's more important is what you want to say about that.
Yeah, sure. So I just want to make the point that I am kind of limiting these comments to the current state of play, as I understand. You've been hearing about that over the course of the last 2 days.
You were here through yesterday.
Yeah, I have, but I've actually been writing this and reviewing it as I go. I'm happy to give you a copy after lunch if you'd like a copy of this. It's just that it's a bit. I need to tidy it up. I've been writing it as I go.
Do whatever. Take your time.
Yeah.
That's fine.
I live nearby. I can bring copies after lunch. So I'm the current chair of ICON.
Okay.
And I just want to make a point about the Inner City West Neighbourhood Association. That's distinct from here. The boundaries which define this neighbourhood area contain within them the entire extent of the proposed Inner City West residential heritage area as currently constituted or proposed, drawn up. So I want to say straight away, ICON strongly supports proposed Inner City West and by extension the other RHAs included in the current plan change 30 provisions. But I am going to talk about Inner City West RHA, but I don't want to lose the fact that support the concept principle as it applies across the city. To the best of my knowledge, none of the current membership of ICON, which is around 50 households, is opposed to the formation of an RHA in our area. and nor am I aware of any non-member individual residents opposing the notion of an RHA. I could be wrong, but I don't think you've received submissions from the residents opposing this RHA. So correct me if I'm wrong. Further, our support for the concept of an RHA includes general support for the system of categorization by which candidates for an RHA have been assessed. And we want to make this clear because, having been here over the last 2 days, I've noted that the system has come in for some criticism. I've obviously read all submissions and so on. I haven't been able to have time to do that, but I know there are submissions that would have criticised that assessment system, and we just want to say we support it, and don't want it to be loosened. In fact, though, we believe the RHA concept has already been significantly weakened by recent council withdrawals from the plan. The plan that they originally drew up in that section, was it 42? As you now say, yeah. And in particular, weakened by the withdrawal of the interface overlays RHA boundaries. And I'd also say that it's been weakened. That's a general point about interface overlays, the RHA concept. But in relation to the inner city west RHA, the concept has been weakened by the recent exclusions at either end of the proposed area. I am aware of the arguments for doing those. I'm going to say a bit more about this, but we are keen to argue that there be no further diminution of the concept, or indeed of the.
Notwithstanding those exclusions, what remains?
Yeah. Yes. Exactly. Because the last point pertains to the suggestion raised yesterday in this room that Ronald McDonald House could also perhaps be excluded from the RHA. Remember that? The suggestion is problematic in our opinion. The existing presence of a neutral or even intrusive element within the boundary of an RHA can serve to protect the area from what the Section 42 report in relation to interface overlays refers to as the visual dominance effect of adjoining high density zone sites, including in relation to, quote, views to and from the heritage area. So it seems to me that this principle takes even more importance now, given the subsequent removal of the idea of interface overlays from the Plan Change 13 proposals.
You'll appreciate that's not within our scope to consider that. It's not before us for determination. So
it's not before you to
it's
not before you to reinstate interface overlays, but it is before you to protect Ronald McDonald House as an integral element of the RHA, because the positioning of Ronald McDonald House in the southeast corner of the RHA has the advantage that building restrictions consistent with RHA status would offer some protection from the immediately adjoining high density area now established by Plan Change 14 in this part of the city. Does that make sense?
I can take your principle. The point you're making in terms of with those interface controls no longer before us. The presence of a particular building may have some value in that regard.
You can't recommend on the boundaries of the RHA.
Correct. Sorry, on the boundaries of the RHA we can't on the interface provisions, which
I understand, absolutely understand. But as you can recommend on the boundaries of the RHA, you can recommend that the inner city west heritage area be preserved in the current integrity that it has, which includes that southeast corner where Ronald McDonald House.
Yes, we can, insofar as that boundary is already being defined, the options available to us, and we'll get more from it from a legal perspective. The reduction or the shrinking of those boundaries is before us as a matter to consider.
Yeah.
It's more problematic and possibly beyond our mandate if we're looking at extensions.
Yeah, not talking about extensions.
Okay.
Simply protections of what's
No, I understand.
the existing state of affairs.
So just so I'm clear,
Yeah.
you're saying that Ronald McDonald House provides a degree of protection of the heritage of the RHA.
Yeah.
And it's the separation from the intensified
Yeah.
CBD.
Yes, because it's right on the corner with Montreal and Cashel, I think it is. Right on that corner, occupies that corner, and beyond that, because that's the boundary of the proposed RHA. Beyond that is high density area, as I understand it. And 14 sectors.
So conceivably, without that RHA recognition and the associated protections, then there's effectively a leaping across, if I could call that, into that block, conceivably.
That would be our concern.
And you mentioned also the visibility.
The visibility, views to and from, which appear to be a factor that's clearly taken into account by council. So I haven't got much more actually, but and this is more of a general point, and again, this possibly doesn't really come in within your ambit, but I want to make the point that one of the great benefits of our RHA, the inner city west one, in the context of the city as a whole, and particularly of the central city, is that it will provide something of a moderating interface between areas of maximum intensification under Plan Change 14 and the natural heritage features of Hagley Park directly to the west. The Icon Residents Association, because of its geographical positioning, has always viewed the park and the river as part of its area of civic responsibility. It's important that people can enjoy the park on its own terms without the intrusion into their views to and from, to quote that, of high and dominating buildings. And confirmation of the RHA in as robust a form as possible, which I would argue is its current form, will be of considerable help in retaining that value. Because, yeah, we are concerned, have always been concerned with the idea. I know people haven't come to talk about Hagley Park, but within Hagley Park, you have to create what the council calls a dominating effect if you've got high buildings on the boundaries, and tend to spoil the effect of the natural heritage.
It's interesting, just if I could get my head around what you're saying, there's a couple of elements that come as a consequence of having an RHA in the area you're talking about, both transitional, if you like, between the very dense and larger massing of the central city, progressing towards the very openness of Hagley, for example, as being one. The other being the potential for the densification outcomes that might arise through the likes of PC14 and other initiatives to intensify in and around that central city location. Elevates the significance of a RHA was what you're telling me.
Well put. That's better than I put it. Yeah.
I won't remember that at all, but I'm trying to capture what you're telling me.
That is absolutely correct.
Right. The other end of the RHA with the YMCA buildings.
Yeah, well, I heard that I didn't realise until yesterday actually they've been excluded. I mean, I can see the argument for that. I'm not so concerned about that. Well, I should say we hope, the Icon would agree, because of the fact that that's on a frontage towards the Botanical Gardens, Hagley Park.
It's not fronting the CBD as such.
No. So, I mean, anything can happen, of course, but the chance, good chance is that that's not going to be an issue. Having those buildings excluded.
So there's the orientation there.
The orientation toward
is the use of the buildings, the newness, I'm speculating, does anyone could be around the likelihood of them continue to be present for some time, those sorts of things. Those sorts of considerations also relevant in terms of whether perhaps excluding those buildings or others from an OHA are valid considerations.
Not quite sure what you.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is you're saying the proximity to the park on that interface compensates, if you like, for excluding those and what may or may not happen in the future on those particular sites because of that frontage, facing and proximity, which is distinguishable from the Ronald McDonald House at the other end, which is interfacing with a more high density area.
Absolutely.
Sorry, Karen.
Can you comment on Cranmer Square?
Yeah, it was raised this morning. I know. I think it was. I mean, in the original submission, we asked for inclusion and other things like Dorset and further on. I think the argument's been put forward for not having Cranmer Square in there because there's actually a different historical era and perspective bearing on that compared with the inner city RHA as it's currently posited. That makes sense. Given that, I mean, I think that if Cranmer Square was included, it would be welcomed. Very much welcomed. You see new power to recommend its inclusion. But this bears back to the point I started with that my most recent discussions with other people in ICON were looking at the proposals as they currently stood, and the Cranmer Square was already out. Yeah, already out. And I wanted to try to just keep the thing to what was in.
That's fine. That's all.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your time. I would appreciate if we can have a copy of that. Feel free to edit. If you could just return it today at some stage.
I actually, Diana has arrived. I understand.
Yes.
So, do you want to add anything, Diana?
I missed the argument.
Yeah.
Sorry. But it is a very precious area to many people, not just personally, actually.
Talking about Cranmer Square now.
Cranmer Square.
No. Well, I take it from that the
Yes.
area generally.
Yes, indeed.
What to probably do, but
I'm having just missed it. I'm sorry, I've got a Better Homes inspection at the moment. Yes, Cranmer Square has been a place of meeting and recreation for a long time. There was a discussion about whether it should be allowed for active recreation, and little boys from the school and nearby schools use it. It's certainly used now, but it's been a place where everybody has gathered, and it has quite a lot of importance in terms of being part of that original planning for Christchurch, which had the parks, the whole arrangement of parks, which actually it was copied and admired even as far as Boston. Boston. So there is something about the quality of the space, and that indeed is reserved by what happens on its surrounds, because anything that happens on a park's surrounds does affect the nature of the park as well. And that goes for even Hagley Park, and seeing the buildings puking over the trees on the edge has been something that people have brought to us over the years with concern.
there is change happening around Cranford. I mean,
Yes.
has been and potentially will continue to be in those surrounding interfaces, isn't it?
Yes. The more we intensify, of course, the more people want a place that has that ability to retreat into a quiet and unpressured space. And that's where parks and open spaces and the edges, even the edges are so important. One stage we fought a battle about the memorial wall that fronts Botanic Gardens directly opposite the centre, and that was considered it would give greater access if it was taken down. Strange argument, we thought, when people went there to escape from the streetscape into a quiet space. So a room beyond the wall was very important. And that's what is the room of Cranmer Square as well. And I gather that during the war, there had been some exercise there. I don't have proof, but certainly it's been recognised in the Anzac Day celebrations. Yeah.
Thank you. Apologies, we started a bit before you arrived, but
Yes, I was.
I think you've been well served by your deputy. I'm not sure we've got turned up. According to my schedule, we've got this Verity next on my.
Yes, Kelly, there is.
Yes, that's not you.
It's my wife.
So you're to your class.
I was the original submitter as well.
Right, okay, that's fine.
I'm here on her behalf.
And Simone Pearson, we're submitting together.
Okay, all right. So you're next if you want to come and say. Right, perfectly.
Yeah, good. That's good. Except I probably should have been here.
No. Well, unless you want to hear from perspective.
That's right.
Yeah, and you appreciate. Sorry, some of these timetables are in constant state of flux.
Yeah.
We do our best.
That's fine.
So I don't know how familiar you are with the process, but basically we want to hear what you want to tell us.
Yeah.
You may have some material you want to read or present in addition to the material we've already got. So we've got the submission material and all that background available to us. Very comfortable if you want to add to that or
Some notes here.
Yeah,
It's really just we've made an oral presentation today.
If you want us to receive those notes either now or later, feel free. We're happy to do
Yes,
that.
okay. Well, I'm happy to leave you a set, but that's fine. Yeah, okay. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to be heard this morning. So I'm Keith Paterson and the husband of Helen Verity, who's an apology. And I've got with me Simone Pearson, who is together with us directly affected by PC13. We both have defining properties in Chester Dawson RHA, and we've both recently upgraded these properties, and so we've got a keen interest in what happens here. We are in the part of the RHA beyond Barbados Street where the high density zone rules permit building heights to 22 metres. And in our original submission, we supported the RHA along with many others, and we sought to include more of Chester Street in the RHA, and we also sought some relief on the edge, as I heard the previous speaker talk about, in relation to the zone, but those things, including the built form rules, were removed in either PC14 or in the council decision in December last year. So we're sort of sitting here reasonably exposed to what Linda has proposed. But we basically want to report our support for the Chester Dawson RHA as a going concern in its current form. Simone will speak to the importance of the area from a social history perspective, and then I'll come up with a few comments on Linda's report. So over to you.
Thank you, and just want to thank you for your time today. So I'm Simone Pearson. I've lived in the neighbourhood for over 20 years. In Central City, and I've seen a lot of change in that time. But I think what's really interesting and unique about the Chester Dawson RHA is that it records, early Christchurch colonial history. I'm not sure how familiar you are with it, but we live down Dawson and Keith is on Chester, and there's about 50 properties in the proposed RHA. Why is it unique? It's unique because it reflects mixed social classes living together in very close proximity. And how did that come about? That came about because Chester Street East was developed and the town reserves were divided up into very large areas of land. And the guy called David Clarkson worked out pretty quick and there was a lot of demand. There just wasn't simply demand for workers' accommodation. So after the abattoir, which was originally the piece of land which was between Kilmore and Chester, they moved the abattoir out, they found some land, and then they started dividing up the land. One of them was Town Reserve 170, and within a month of him purchasing that, he made a private road called Dawson. Well, it was actually named after himself originally, David Street, because there's a David Street in Littleton and a St David Street already in Christchurch. I think they changed the name to Carter's Lane, and eventually it became Dawson. What's very quickly what started happening was the demand for workers' accommodation was so high that very, very quickly, unlike the land that was on Chester Street East, which has big pieces of land and very large grand homes, workers' accommodation started popping up really, really quickly, and it met that demand. For example, at the Wards Brewery site, and to do all the things that a city needed to do. So lamp lighters, sewerage people, and all sorts of interesting characters and workers who did the work of running the city. So that's kind of the history. That's how it came about. That David Clarkson saw an opportunity. He divided up the land, and then what we have now is a reflection of that, and a wonderful exemplar of Christchurch central city. So what was the 4As, what defined Christchurch, and a small little pocket reflecting this rich social history of working class people with small workers' cottages, and then these big grand stately homes. There are over 50 homes in the RHA, and many of them, 70% actually, are either contributory or defining. And many of them have been done up since 2021, since the earthquake. So it's this little microcosm, and people are interested in it. On just Sunday, I just did a tour with a whole lot of interested people who want to know more about the history. So whilst we've had all this rapid change with the earthquakes in Christchurch, this is a little pocket of an exemplar of our social history. Compared with world history, we in New Zealand, we're a young country. We don't a lot compared with, but this is a little pocket of it, and so that is why we're here today in support of it, because we think that the RHA for Chester Dawson in particular will help support preserving that for future generations. And just to build on that just a little bit more, we've worked with the council over the years to further enhance it, and Dawson has been turned into a Werner Street, and which means a pedestrian friendly street. So the curb and channel removed, traffic calming boxes, planter boxes put in, street lights removed. Chester Street put in trees. So it's been a wonderful partnership with the council to really enhance this area even more. And that's because, and as a result of that, people love living there. It's tree lined, it's got a little pocket park, which people in Central City don't need their own backyard area. They use the community space at the pocket park. And I hope just by coming along today and sharing some of those little unique gems it helps show you that this is a really special and outlier of Christchurch in the central city, and something that's worth protecting for future generations. And that's why we both as property owners have invested and committed, because that's our legacy that we've done, and we hope that you will do what you can to help support that in your sort of own roles in the sort of within the planning framework. That's all I have to say about this local history.
Thank you very much. Look, we should have said probably at the start that we actually been there and we wandered around as a group collectively together, spent some time there. The weather was cooperative that day. It wasn't necessarily so all of the time we were out on site, but so we're familiar with the having spent some time walking through.
Oh, that's really great to hear.
And look, I can endorse what you say. What you've just told us is really valuable for our learning and the role that we're performing, because we don't necessarily get that from anywhere else. So local lived experience is really valuable insight. So appreciate that. So what you've done is very valuable for what we're doing.
Yeah.
Thank you. So we're not urban designers or planners or politicians or architects or whatever. We're simply just residents of that area, and we do love it, and so we do believe it is worthy of protecting. And Simone's made the point that it is a physical representation of the city's history, and it shows cohesion in its own way, and that is quite unique. We could talk ad nauseum about other challenges other cities have, but actually we just wanted to come along today and say that we believe it's worth keeping, and it needs your help to do so. We don't think it's fair for the homeowners to be asked to carry the burden of that protection without sort of giving some framework for that to happen. And I think Glenda's got it pretty well sorted in the sense that balance she's come up with making it workable in the current sort of political and social environment is pretty good. The only thing that we are a bit worried about is the differentiating between defining and contributory properties when it comes to demolition. I think it's RD7.
Yep.
And I think if the premise is that the collection of these properties together creates the special nature of the place and worth protecting, then I think Glenda's proposition is that there's just too much work involved in the consents that would come from consent to demolish contributing properties. But we think that it would be valuable to have that notification up front. So in other words, make them notified or partially notified. I'm not sure what the terminology is, Glenda, but
so your interest is around the suggestions or recommendations us around the notification clause or predetermination of whether notification is.
Yes, correct. Yes.
Activities themselves.
Yeah. I think the protection of the new builds under, I think it's RD6 or whatever it is, are satisfactory, and realising that there's a strong reliance on the council's heritage team probably to make discretionary judgments about what fits in there. I mean, I think those protections are pretty loose, but accepting that, I mean, some of these properties don't contribute, so therefore, you know, the future state might be better than the current state. That's probably where that comes from, hopefully. But I mean, I think my observation is that it does seem to be a pretty loose cover, if you would. You know, I don't know how else to describe it. Not being a professional, you know, knowing all the particular clauses to refer to, but where there were a lot of rules and a lot of requirements around what you could do and what you can't do now, it's reasonably open, and that on the one hand is good, but it leaves those of us who are in the box seat in terms of the defining properties a little potentially exposed. We are likely to have 20, or potentially could have 22-storey buildings on our northern and western flanks from the boundary, and therefore you start to say, well, what impact does that have if the premise is that we've got an area worth protecting for all of its contributing parts, and then you have these sort of edges and so on. So yeah, I guess we would like you to consider that contributing properties should be treated in the same way that defining properties are in respect of demolition, and probably that's the only area where we would deviate from Glenda's summation.
And notification.
And notification. So I think that's about it. Point of view. So I
Unless you
think
have any questions.
Just trying to write.
Can I ask us about extension, because you saw the extension as well?
yes,
Yeah.
we sought the transition zone on Kilmore Street, and that's because there are two defining properties and the properties on Dawson Street that are orientated to the north, are quite exposed to the issue on Kilmore Street. And there's a few properties there that are jointly owned, which are likely to be, well, obviously, good potential development sites. And we're not saying we don't want development, but I think it's just the quality of that development in respect of the RHA is it's not as bad in our place as what it is further down where it's 32 metres, but it's still quite a significant encumbrance and impact on our properties.
So the extension would offer that ability for anything, when that was removed, to be assessed for.
Yes, for its impact on the RHA. That was what we were seeking. That transition zone was basically the south side of Kilmore over the length of the properties. But that was, I think the logic was that you couldn't impose that on that area if you can't impose it on a heritage building. Why would you impose such a thing on those? So I guess we're resigned to that, but certainly, David, interested that you're interested in that, because I thought that was off the table
No, you're talking about, you were talking about an extension.
Okay, no, that's a transition. No, the extension.
Transitional zone.
Yeah, okay, so no, the extension was for the rest of Chester Street through to Fitzgerald Ave on the basis that, I mean, the social history doesn't go away. I mean, the prevalence of defining properties goes away, but the fact that that connection was originally all the way through to Fitzgerald Ave supports the proposition that the area was important. The definition of listed is couched around the quality of the individual properties from a heritage perspective, but the impact is the collective.
Have you been listening yesterday to the responses of Dr. McEwan in relation to that? No, I think
sorry.
we had questioned her yesterday.
Oh, I see.
With
Good.
regards to that, and one of the points that she made is that while the western end is relatively intact in terms of the amount of buildings and what's there on the ground now, the other end is very much interspersed with new buildings and things that don't fit. And what her approach was that she tried to do a consistent approach, and they have had some criteria. For example, around 15 buildings should be in that area,
yes.
And planned in didn't quite make it.
Yeah, I know. If you set that as the criteria, then it's not going to make it.
Yeah.
But if you set the criteria as where did people walk, or where was the areas of interest and what might have been there before, notwithstanding what there's now, then of course it would comply. But that's the brief.
It's a brief.
Understood.
No, just in terms of the Chesterfield's Park and its usage. Both Wednesday. I think that's fine.
Yep. So what happened was the council identified that the part of Central City, which is where we live, the east side, had a dearth of green spaces. So what they worked out is that they changed the district plan and said developers, they can build smaller areas for outdoors, and the premise is not everyone needs to own their own outdoor space if you have community shared spaces. They therefore then look for pieces of land in the mid-block with reasonably large portions of land with established trees, and Chesterfield was made up of 3 properties. They bought it, and then it's now a really well-loved, well-used community space, which is really, really important for the neighbourhood in terms of a place that anyone can go. And it's sort of got beautiful established trees, and we have an annual Christmas party there, and there's a lot of people with small children there, and there's a trampoline at the park. Lots of people have dogs in the neighbourhood, so they take their dogs there. So it's, I guess, and this whole area, the Chester East Dawson, and I understand this is beyond sort of the remit perhaps of what you're doing, but it was printed in the press sort of as an exemplar of sort of of how people can live in terms of in central cities and smaller pockets of development, smaller homes, but where you have large community reserves. It's very kind of European, where people can enjoy community spaces together, and not everyone needs to own a big piece of land. So it supports intensification, and it supports community wellbeing because it provides a space that people can be together and bump into their neighbours and catch up and about important things that are happening. So sort of on both levels, you often use as an exemplar of sort of how good urban planning and how we can build cities which are good for people and also good for healthy dry homes in terms of more homes.
It is a garden. It is a garden, a community garden as well. So it was a good purpose as addition.
And it was named after Chester, the dog, Chester's Field, because it was 3 properties, and Chester was an Alsatian with cancer. He had 3 legs. He's buried under the kowhai tree, and it was Chester Fields, Chester's Fields. That's where the name comes from.
All right. Yep.
Thank you very much. If you can leave us a copy or provide us with a
Yes.
copy of
Yeah.
it's just helpful.
It's,
That's the same, or is
yeah, that's the same.
we only need we can
Okay.
copy it. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. Nice seeing you, Dave.
Yeah, we just get copies of it. Right. We should be having Mr. Dyhrberg and followed by the Civic Trust, Mr. Gilchrist. I don't know if they're here.
I haven't heard from Peter. Mr. Gilchrist did email earlier saying he probably couldn't make it until after lunch. He's asked if that's okay with you.
Okay.
Just given the updated schedule.
Yeah. Any word from Mr. Dyhrberg?
Haven't heard from Peter, no.
So we're at 20 past. We're nearly at what was going to be scheduled for lunch anyway. I wonder if we just take a lunch break now.
I wonder, Commissioner, whether it would be useful for you to hear from Dr. McEwan now for her response to points made about ratings yesterday that she's had a look at overnight.
Oh, okay. Yep, we could do that.
So she said that would be 5 minutes.
Yeah, I promise I won't.
Yeah, we'll do that. If we haven't got others arriving, we'll put the lunch break. Yeah, we're not. Yeah. No, we're on. Remarkably, we're on time.
Yes, yeah, I promise I won't spoil.
That's all right.
So thank you. I just wanted to respond. So the Commissioner had itemised a number of individual properties yesterday. So I just wanted to work through that.
Yeah.
29 Dublin Street in Littleton.
Yes.
Is one of the properties that was in my rating change Appendix 2.
Okay.
That has a neutral rating.
And, yeah.
And the reason for that, there was a modified villa that was on the site that was demolished a couple of years ago. It's one of those properties in Littleton that even though it is vacant, because of the topography, it has a lesser visual impact than if it was in Christchurch City. And I mentioned that there is a distinction there yesterday.
Yeah.
So that's 29 Dublin. That's the reason why it is neutral, which varies to the other property in Littleton, 13 Exeter Street. That has an intrusive rating, which, as Commissioner Lutz pointed out, seemed to be kind of in conflict. The reason why I gave it an intrusive rating is that it is in the central part of Littleton, which is kind of on the grid. And in my opinion, the vacant nature of that site, again, there was a villa, it was demolished 2 years ago. I gave that an intrusive rating more akin to Christchurch City examples.
Topography influence.
Exactly, because it's kind of on the flat, if you will, in Littleton, and therefore that missing tooth is has a much more noticeable impact. So that's why there is that discrepancy there. And I can provide you with all these specific.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Now the next one was the southeast corner of Inglefield Avonville, which was mentioned. That property is number 6 Hanmer Street. And the question was why I had given that a contributory rating. And the reason for that is actually borne out by the Google Street Views, because that actually, and that was one of my key reference points in terms of the historic research. It was the historic aerials, but also street views for more recent changes. So this is a modified cottage. The best I can do at the moment is say that it's a late 19th century cottage that has been subject to some modifications and a very unsympathetic fence, I have to say. So that is the basis for my contributory rating, is that it is a modified colonial cottage, which I believe that rating has been consistent with the approach I've taken in other RHAs, and so on. And then in the Shelley Forbes area, yesterday we identified, yes, there's a mapping error with that property, which has now been subdivided into four parcels, sorry. It's got a two-story, 4 townhouse development on it. The map is an error, the record form is not. There was a question asked about 25 Forbes Street. And that is if you can see the tiny little picture just for your reference, you would have noticed that it looks like a little square plan cottage. It was actually built in 2021. So that's why it has a neutral rating, not a higher grade, if you will, because it is a modern, a brand new home, but definitely one that is in keeping with the architectural qualities of the street. The other two in Shelley Forbes 19 is rated intrusive. That is a house that is basically, it's a 2012 property that looks like a garage with a house attached. The garage is all you see from it's all you see from the street is basically, it's one of those ones, oh yes, our car lives there and we sleep behind the car kind of scenario. So that's why that was been rated intrusive. On the other hand, 17A Forbes, next door, I rated that neutral because it is a new home, but it maintains the typology. Yes, you can see the garage from the road, but it's more like there's a house plus a garage.
So that fact that you've got visibility of both, albeit the garage there, you've got the house as well. Previously, the neighbour or the one next door doesn't. You've got a garage, and that's the interface with the street.
Yes,
yeah.
And I know that when we start talking about streetscape, you know, there is that danger of treading into character areas, but essentially the historic quality of these kind of probably almost all of these RHAs is that people are building to the street. That you know, a villa always puts its best foot forward. Yeah. And so streetscape is part of heritage assessment, even though obviously it is also a key factor with character. So that's why there is a distinction there. And the outlier in a way is number 25 Forbes, because that is a new cottage. And so that's where being able to drive around these RHAs with Google takes you back before the earthquakes. It actually provides an enormous amount of information in a Christchurch context because of that post-quake development and so on. And so that was the properties as I recall. The only other one that came up was Ronald McDonald, obviously, which I had rated intrusive. And I perhaps would note at this point, finally, that might be a property in light of the icon evidence that you've heard this morning. That might be a property that might be appropriate to review to see whether it would kind of in that neutral, intrusive kind of space. And if I may, certainly for my own satisfaction, I'd be happy if the panel directed it, I'd be happy to review that particular property because it is closely connected to and associated with buildings on either side. Because I think the icon evidence has raised some issues around that site. And in general terms, yes, I identified yesterday that having an intrusive site at the edge of an RHA is problematic, but I also think that the icon evidence you've heard has raised some considerations that if the panel was of a mind, I would certainly be happy to review that record form to see whether I've had a think about that subsequently.
I mean, it seems sensible if it's worth doing and it can be accommodated, whether it falls into line with closing.
I can do it at lunch because it's just down there.
Look, it'll be helpful, irrespective of where it takes you. The fact that you think that's worth doing from your perspective, it's worth doing from ours.
Yes. Okay, thank you. So that was, I hope that I've covered all of those individual properties. Obviously, I can compile them, give you those record forms for those properties, just so that you've got that front and centre with the tiny wee photos in them. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Yeah, very helpful. All right, well, let's take a circumstance of change in terms of submitters present. So let's take a break. What are we now? 12:30. So let's take through till
That looks like that one.
That one. No?
No.
No?
Yeah.
That one.
So that's for when the Philips are doing their presentation. The second thing I put in front of you is the letter that Health New Zealand have sent to Mrs. Richmond, which is a response to some questions you're asking yesterday about the Health New Zealand position in relation to Queen Princess Margaret Health.
Which was continued to more unresolved.
Yes.
So this
So-
is their position.
Yes.
Just give us for a moment, just talking about housekeeping, a little brief events.
So we've got
I would just sort of, I just want to do a bit of a stop taking. We didn't hear from you this morning, but you're still wishing to present, presumably. That's why you're here.
Yes. I emailed yesterday to confirm, and I was advised 1:45.
Okay. Don't hold me to that.
I indicated between 10 and 15 minutes.
10 to 15 minutes. Harley, we're aware of. You're scheduled to come in at thereabouts. Yeah, the thereabouts is helpful because thank you. Who else am I looking at? Sorry. Hamish?
Yes.
Civic Trust? 10 minutes? That seems reasonable?
Yes, a little bit over, but just a fraction more.
Yeah, so here in a lot.
I tried timing it all, it seems to look at it.
Who else have we got? Sorry.
Jocelyn and the third speaker, the trust.
With the trust as well?
Yes.
Sorry, okay. Well, by my schedule, you're next. So I'm going to do that. And then we'll possibly see how we're tracking time and others' availability. Really good to squeeze in this afternoon. It isn't actually scheduled for the afternoon session, but we'll try and accommodate that as best we can. It's our intention to try and get through completely through today. So that may mean that we either extend the day a bit longer and or take a shorter afternoon tea break. But I'm pretty strongly motivated to get through everybody this afternoon. So if we're running behind time, and anything particularly those wishing to present in any way that needs to run up against a deadline in terms of having to be elsewhere, let us know. And we'll do our best to bring you forward into the scheme. Sorry, Sarah, no, you're up afternoon tea, and you've got a 45-minute slot. Is that accurate? You're expecting to spend 45 minutes with us? Sorry, you've got a 45-minute allocation of time. Is that what you think you'll need? After afternoon tea, so at about 3:30. Is that okay? Is 45 minutes what you think you'll take?
Only about 10 minutes to read my submission. So.
Okay, so 10 minutes, not 45.
Yes.
10. That's fine. Are you able to be here till 3:30?
Shall be here.
I missed anyone. Right. So we'll begin. Mr. Jordan, I'll invite you to come forward first. You're on the schedule, and then see how we're tracking. Don't get too excited. You might not be next, but you might be. And we'll reassess. Then we can go next to start. Oh, sorry, Mr. Harding, you've given us a 10-minute indication. Is that it?
Yeah, it would be at the most. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Presentations to us. Are you going to present orally, or are you going to?
Yes, orally, I did have a submission
sure if you've got a copy of that.
We do. We've got a copy of all of those submissions. I may not necessarily have it at my fingertips, but if you want to speak to that submission, that's fine. If you've got any written material you want us to receive, that's fine as well. But
I'm going to talk more generally. I've written some notes and just
okay, we're in your hands.
My name's Christian Jordan, and thanks for allowing me to speak today. I'll just begin with some remarks actually from my submission, some of those comments there. So I start by saying the built heritage is a gift from past generations to the future. It tells the story of the past, creates memories of place, which builds a sense of identity, belonging, and community. And those heritage losses are irreversible. So real care is needed that value for future generations is not disregarded or discarded on the whim of a policy or economic condition that only exists for a short moment in time. So if we consider that interest deductibility on favouring new builds, difficulty obtaining post-earthquake insurance, tighter rules on rental standards, tighter mortgage criteria on old homes, pushing high density rules into established inner areas, higher temporary immigration rates, super low interest rates, incentivising new build investment units, all those factors are transitory. But with the heritage, we need a longer term view. So that was some of the comment that I'd made in my initial submission. But many of these buildings have been there a century and a half. So 5 years is only a small point in time for the history of these buildings. So it's actually with some despondency that I'm here reflecting on the loss of so many significant, mainly timber houses that had significant heritage value, were in excellent condition, and also demolished without the slightest consideration of their heritage value. Auckland has significantly greater protection through the heritage areas, even under the new legal framework. Vast parts of the inner suburbs have very strict rules. Only a few small pockets proposed in Christchurch. Dunedin and Wellington are somewhat insulated from the problem because the small section sizes and the topography. And you consider Sydney and Melbourne, the job that they've done with protecting, even with the huge amounts of expansion and growth, they're protecting large areas of those in the areas with heritage areas. And then, of course, when you consider Europe and London, with hundreds of year-old homes, its area has been completely intact. Yet here in Christchurch, we're losing so much of our connection to the past through, we lost so much through the earthquakes, and now we're seeing an even greater loss at an alarming rate, primarily under a pretense of the need for affordable housing. Just a quick comment on the affordable housing issue, that demolishing existing houses to build brand new houses doesn't actually necessarily make anything cheaper. So it's another whole story. But sadly, heritage provisions here focused on the minutiae of protecting selected items without a broad approach across all heritage buildings to heritage value, meaning that one building can be protected while another with near identical values nearby can be lost without any consideration. Other cities that I mentioned before have those often focuses on the street appearance or facade with bulk appearance as being a key issue. And here we've gone, there's a lot more minutiae detail, which has caused, it causes a lot of the things not to be considered and being far too specific without general protection. And we've got other buildings throughout the city being demolished without even the slightest blink of consideration. Just getting back to some of the points, I made a few further submissions on other people's comments. And just like, no, I'm the owner of, I actually own 88 Chester Street East, which is heritage listed, and it's one of the surviving semi-detached houses opposite the Baptist Church on Oxford Terrace. So I have a little bit of interest in that Chester Street zone, and there's been a few submissions on that. I opposed Fire and Emergencies proposal to remove their site from that heritage overlay. Clearly, if you remove the site, you could have anything built there of any scale
which is on the north side. It's got a hugely detrimental effect to the actual character. There's such small pockets left, and that little bit of chest between Barbados and Madras is one of the small pockets where it's almost intact from the early 1900s, and there's only, I think, one redevelopment. There's been a few demolitions that have been vacant sites, but so I don't, because I think at the moment you're proposing to remove it completely. I'd suggest that the front, if you're not going to keep it on the whole site, at least the front 10 metres of that site needs to be in the zone, so that if you're building something in the front, it's going to take consideration of the zone. If you're further back and it ends up being a big apartment block, then it's not such an issue. But certainly in that front part where there's a direct appearance to the street.
We've heard about some recommendations around reducing to 5, for example. Your preference would be 10.
Well, 5 doesn't really allow, means that 5 metres back you just go straight up to the maybe 4-storey building or something, depending on what ultimately zone, what height restriction is on that side. I'm not sure what the final height
would be your preference.
Yeah, so that it incorporates the front facade of whatever building gets built there is incorporated into the zone. So they can apply for resource consent if they need to, and deal with it in that respect. If you just give someone carte blanche to do whatever they want, you'll have what you've seen on other sites, a big 3 or 4-storey apartment block built there, with no consideration at all. So it doesn't necessarily need to be a low density or anything like that. It could still be a very high density development. It just needs to be in consideration of that. So that's and knowing that they obviously intend doing something there at some stage, that I think it's important that we don't lose that last little pocket, which is quite intact. One comment I was going to make about that area is, my property there is 1890s. There's only a handful of 1860s. Actually, interestingly, my great-grandfather had the hotel, Foresters Hotel, the next block down in the 1860s, there when they arrived from Ireland. So it's that area, it's although mine's 1890s, 30 years later, and it had been a vacant site up to that point, it's a collection of a progression of buildings there. So you can't look at heritage as just being, it's not one fixed point in time. There's one building directly opposite, it's a 1920s bungalow. It's privately owned, and there's other properties from various eras through there, through that whole point. So it's part of the thing that's been lost with the heritage zones across the city, is that you're often picking areas that are where there's a single focus. So like in St Albans areas, the Severn Street type 10th Street areas, it's all built at the same era and it's reasonably intact, almost completely intact. And I think Ryan Street was proposed with a similar sort of thing over in Linwood. I'm not sure if that's still being proposed or not, but so a lot of these areas you've selected them on the basis that they're all intact, but you need to show that there's a mix of history and you've got the evolution of in some of these areas, especially as in the city areas where you've got from the 1860s through. And as I said, there's only a couple of cottages from the 1860s there, but we've lost just in the last couple of years a number of 1860s cottages in Armagh, Madras, around the corners that may not have been significant, often were behind hedges and big fences, and you wouldn't even know they're there. But they've gone to redevelopment without any consideration because they weren't listed. Weren't considered particularly significant, but now gone, and they've been there for well over 150 years. And it's the same sort of issue that we see over on the Christ College. I opposed their submission in the west, that they wanted to remove the zoning from those sites, and I can't see that zoning. I think the heritage teams agreed that zoning needs to be remaining on those sites. But it's for the same reason. You've got that mix of, there's a progression of history there, and retaining those that direct progress of development over time. It's important to be able to see that there, and you don't get lost and just removed and a large block that doesn't consider the relationship with its neighbours. So obviously we've got this same issue across the whole central city. that you're losing sites. I mean, we own a property in Gloucester Street. It's built in 1874. Unfortunately, still boarding up post earthquakes, but a large two-storey house. There would, at the time of the earthquakes, there were 3 of those houses in the blocks now they're protected. In the Gresson's Lane block, which is Gresson's Lane's now disappeared, but anyway, those other 2 were demolished, dating from that period, and there were a lot of houses in that area in the 1890s, the large two-storied houses. There's a two-storied one there. A lot of the large two-storied houses through there are all gone now, and so that record of it's just been erased pretty much, and you wouldn't know what was there. And it's a real shame that we've lost that history without any consideration on these sites, because they weren't heritage listed and they weren't earthquake damaged, but they were slightly earthquake damaged, but not significantly that they need to be demolished. But because there's been no protection, there's been no consideration of it. And I do find this an issue with the way the whole plan's developed, that you're taking an all or nothing approach on a lot of things. And I'd give the example of Pico Crescent, which looks like it's going to be removed from the heritage listings. The Pico is pretty lightly developed, with almost all the sites not subdivided or any additional houses built. I actually know a few people that own properties through there, and they're on very large sections, and could easily have a second dwelling built at the back, retaining the front, appearance to the street. Yet you take it off completely, and all you're going to get happen through there is it replaced with intermittent blocks of 5 or 6 apartments on each side. Instead of perhaps where you could have achieved retaining the house and building perhaps 2 units, small units at the back, or something along those, and would have had an intensification and everything would have been become more feasible to be repaired. So taking that all or nothing approach, it's just going to, you've essentially lost that area, because it is an interesting area of state houses being one first, or maybe the first. I think why it was protected. And it's got that mix of styles, which they've tried to achieve initially with the state housing. So that's going to be lost if that protection is removed. So I want to discuss a few other issues around the zones at the end. But just before I go to that, I'll go to some of the other points that I got further submissions on, opposing some of the proposed demolitions. I had in my original submission said that I didn't see that this plan change process should be used to just as a way to for people to litigate getting heritage listings removed on buildings that they probably bought knowing it had a heritage listing, just at a no-cost basis. I mean, there's no cost to putting a submission in. I'll put a submission in and get to talk to you here today. So we just had this process in 2015-ish, and you run through a huge amount of work that every single item being reconsidered every few years if you do it every plan review, and it just becomes an uphill battle for people to try and argue to retain buildings. So that was my submission on that originally, and I was going to then I opposed a number of the demolitions, and one of these reasons is that people buying with knowledge of the building being protected. And one example would be, I'm not sure you know the property at Coverdale Homestead in 14 Kirkwood Ave, now no longer exists, burnt down in large fire next to the university on Kirkwood Ave. It was a large fire in 2022. So that was for sale. We own a property, a large two-storey house next door, and I actually had an offer accepted to purchase that property, and met with Heritage and things, but it ran into, there were complications, and they were actually being very tight on. I wanted to be able, it was a 7,000 square metre section. I wanted to be able to subdivide it, and there was also an issue with the rates being excessively high. They were $40,000 a year because it's still considered the 20 odd units, and I wanted to see if they could be reduced down to what it would be if it was vacant site. So so we were about 10,000 a year, to make it more feasible to own, and it ended up not coming together. And we withdrew in the hope of actually getting a lower price to purchase buy it. But another buyer came along and put in an offer, and he had no interest, obviously, in fixing the building, and left it abandoned to squatters and things, and opened up. And it turns out that he was actually the same person who owned 300 Hereford Street, and was doing exactly the same thing there, which was the building that I'm not sure he also had a fire in it, and it was the one that Peter Jackson had used as a set for Heavenly Creatures in the 1990s. A two-storied in a city house. So both of those were lost because the owner that bought them, knowing they had heritage protection, disregarded the rule and just wanted it demolished and just neglected it. So we're seeing that with 146 Fendleton Road as well, had that with the fire there that burnt that down, and we're now seeing it with we saw it with Antonio Hall. We've obviously seen it as well. So it's the difficulty in rewarding people that have deliberately neglected. And I recall back in the 90s, I'm not sure if you remember it, there was a case where the City Council took the owner of it was one of those concrete, one of the first state houses, a villa style property in the commercial part of Mandeville Street, and the owner had partially demolished the side of the house, and the council enforced them to reinstate it exactly as it was. That sort of, at one stage, the council was taking a very firm approach there on these things, and now they seem to have almost rewarding those neglects. So I mean, this is why one of the reasons why Antonio Hall I was opposed, just for the simple fact that they neglected that, and if they want to come to, they should come in with a proposal to do something to retain what heritage that they believe can be retained, or that council thinks can be retained. I also find that people that are coming in with consents to say demolish building, I'm not sure if you know about the Hydro brand in Timaru, which of course had a proposal to build a big hotel about 6 or 7 years ago now, or might have been a bit longer ago, and the consent was contingent on the work being starting within 2 years, and of course the site's sitting vacant, and the person who owns it's got no interest in building the building. It was just virtually a ploy to get it demolished. So you run into this issue time and time again, and it's one of the issues when people have bought these properties knowing that they're heritage listed and then disregarding them, and then I go on to Dyhrberg House. So Dyhrberg is I know very well, and I see someone had a photo of it over there. There's obviously people very opposed to that, and I'd be opposed to it extremely as well. I know the property very well because when I was 10 years old, when Malcolm and Alana North owned it, and we used to go there after school. The whole class went there and used the swimming pool and rode down the stream and things. But it's a unique property. I mean, it's up to the standard of Mona Vale. It's got the history of, I think, one of the royal visits. I think it was took place there, and it's fixable, and it might seem difficult, but for instance, like on my one on Chester Street, they had a 9-metre high brick wall on an angle, cracked, and we removed that. The other side had been demolished by the brick wall on the other side. That wall was removed. The front had been completely skewed over. Of the entire ground floor, there are only 12 studs left. The entire floor is new, so the upper floor and it's all been rebuilt, and the project's not finished yet, but it's from a building that everyone said was red stickered and unfixable. We got it fixed, and it wasn't a huge undertaking. I mean, we had to dig 3 meters underneath the house where the house is propped up on studs on anchors to go down to solid ground as well, because there had been a creek through the house. So it's pretty flexible. We see this with things like Dyhrberg, just saying that it's people making excuses that is something that's not fixable. And you can argue that with anything. I mean, every single heritage building could make that argument. And of course, planners have often gone with expert advice, whether it's engineers or whatever. But you can always get someone to say things are not repairable. So that's one example that I think desperately should be saved. And given that the person bought it at an open market auction and outbid other buyers that were potentially going to buy it and restore it, they can't give them the benefit of doing it, because we just get this time and time again of people being outbid. And as I said, the one that I was looking at, effectively this new buyer came along and outbid our negotiation of trying to get a reduced price because we couldn't do what we wanted to do with the council restrictions on it. So and again with, I mean, I'm not sure what the state of Harley Chambers is now. I think that's, may have taken it off the list, but I'll just I'm not sure if you know of Endel Lust, the engineer who did the work on New Regent Street. So I knew him reasonably well, and he was working on our project there. And I mean, that Harley Chambers, he was insistent on that was fixable, and there was no problem with it. And he just couldn't see why people wouldn't want to go in and fix it. And he's of course now passed away, but a lot of these projects, it's just down to the opinion of someone saying it's not fixable, and then of course everyone just toes the line and agrees and thinks it's betterment of whether it's affordable housing or a new development for a hotel or whatever it is. So we've seen this loss time and time again across the city, and so I mean, what I suggested in, just to round up, in my submission was there needs to be more work done to look at. I mean, the heritage, the plan you're proposing is just insufficient to cover anything. And I think in that submission point, I think the planners agreed with that more work needs to be done. But that doesn't really help anything either. And I'm completely aware that it's mostly futile in terms of you're not in probably the position to be able to make any decisions that can genuinely impact on from where the plan's written at the moment. There's so much further work would need to be done to adequately address it. And I think that's sort of the point that I want to make, that there needs to be greater provisions across the plan. I mean, with what's happened with the densification, all it's done is, and what the council has decided to do by retaining lower density in the outer suburbs, which sort of meets what central government wants, it's pushed all the high density into the inner areas, which also happens to be areas where all the properties of heritage value. So we're seeing all the significant heritage buildings that are just, they're not necessarily, they're on bigger sections. They're not necessarily in poor condition or anything like that. They may be a little bit run down, but corner shops, I mean, just the other, everything just on Believe, another corner shop that was sort of notable had gone from the late 1890s. You've seen significant buildings just being removed simply because there's pressure for to find sites to develop, because other areas are not rezoned to those things, and you want to create things in the city. You've got all this commercial zoned land that's poorly used down in Sydenham, that's to the industrial areas that has been zoned for intensification for residential use, but no one's taken that because it's simpler to demolish a character villa on 800 square metres. And we're seeing that through, especially in North Linwood, and a lot of the most significant houses through there, unfortunately, have recently been demolished. The ones that sort of defined the area, especially around sort of in the Tancred, England sort of street areas, there's been a number of demolitions through there. And that had been in the, when I put my original submission, and that was an area that I suggested, that North Linwood area was one of the areas that should actually be looked at for being heritage sites. But all of a sudden, you suddenly get large blocks of flats going in, and it completely changes the character of the area. And now that opportunity, people will say, well, it doesn't have this character because you've got all these blocks of flats. So as soon as you get one or two things, it's almost considered lost. And so we've got that issue there, but the solution could be to identify bigger pockets. So you've got areas like Papanui, Strohan, that is just before, the Rutland Street through to the railway track, Alpha, that whole area around St Andrews. Those streets, I mean, I've got a couple of properties through there, of character, 20s properties, and there's some of the finest properties, they'll get demolished, without any consideration, as well. And we see this time and time again, that sort of the whole architectural history of the area gets lost. And so solutions can be that, to have those identified pockets. And my other suggestion had been that a pre-1940s rule where that you have a simple, for demolition, you have has to do an assessment, which might discourage people from buying those properties in the first instance, if they had to take a slightly longer time to do an assessment. But then, of course, you get criticism of that it holds up development and affordability, which unfortunately, that's just been, there's a lot of political correctness type things saying, oh, you can't, it's heritage is the problem for affordability crisis and things, but it's simply not. I mean, there's if you look objectively across the city, there's land everywhere, and it's with people looking at those easy targets of those heritage buildings, because for whatever reason, as I said, some of the reasons earlier, like needing upgraded for healthy homes rules and things, or earthquake repairs, that people can't haven't got them to the standard where they're easily rentable, so you can't get a bank loan on it easily, so it gets restricted into a different pool of buyers who are someone that's going to either work on it to repair it or work on it to redevelop it. And unfortunately, there's just a huge number of people wanting to redevelop those properties. So it's just a dilemma that we have in Christchurch, and we've just pretty much losing the entire history of the fabric of the city very rapidly, with having lost the entire central city. I mean, you go through streets in the central city now, and you've got unfortunately, the way it's also been developed, we've lost that record of where individual sites were, because they've been amalgamated and things. So there's to also now, on top of that, losing all the suburban heritage, it seems like a double whammy for the city, and it's really quite disappointing. And it's, I think, more work needs to go into it, and some of these things wouldn't be expensive to implement if you, for instance, if there were rules around looking at these buildings, it would be the onus on the person developing it to bear the cost of that. And I mean, in a lot of these cases where things have been developed, I take one next to mine in North Linwood. There was a the 1920s, actually 1910s bungalow, a fairly unique one. It was sort of pre-World War One, and actually an interesting story, because the guy that, when I bought it back in 2007, the man that lived there had actually rented it since 1938. He's now passed away, but he rented it when he was about 21 years old or so. And the person who rented it off was actually the parents of a World War One Gallipoli victim, and it had been his first home, and he'd only been there a few months and then went to war, and intending to return, but his parents couldn't bear parting with it, so they kept it until they finally sold it to Frank in 1938. And that property came on the market. It was at a time when prices were driven sky high. So it sold for exceptionally more than what it would have as a house just 6 months earlier. And the developer went and put 6 units there and bulldozed without consideration. So
I don't want to put the brakes on.
no, I know. That's
But I will,
yeah.
because you've had considerable.
I didn't realise I dropped it.
Yeah, no, so a couple of minutes if you need it to wrap up, but we're conscious we've got to get through.
Yes, no, sorry, I didn't realise we'd gone over that time. So, yeah, so but that's the type of issue that whole history gets lost when there would have been a in that scenario the potential to subdivide it, still build a couple of units behind, and intensify, and but you get they're lost. So there needs to be a better consideration across the district plan for how to achieve this, and I don't think the current proposals work to do that.
Okay. I've got something there.
No, that's right.
Questions? Do we have any questions?
That's why you picked the 1940s as the pre-1940 as the cut-off date.
Well, that's simply because I think Auckland had done the same thing at one point, and that you get into the group housing and large suburbs. There was through into that period. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of like standard housing through the 20s and 30s, but there's a lot has been removed. So it's really targeting that sort of pre-1920s things, but there's a lot into the 20s and 30s that are worthy of merit. So I think that's it's just a board, and it's also easier to identify because once you get beyond 1940s, you get into the group type housing, and it's very easy to identify those areas as well.
Just an observation, not a question. You were talking about that heritage is not fixed in one point in time, and that the mix of the history is getting lost. I'll take that as a criticism on the methodology of how the council has actually implemented their templates and how they've actually worked it there. Unfortunately, that's not something that we can actually decide upon because that was a matter of Plan Change 14.
Yeah, I know that there's not much that you'll possibly be able to do, unfortunately, and it's a bit futile. But it's if the council was able to do further work to come up with more improvements, that would be the optimum solution.
Thank you for your time.
Apologies for
That's okay. Mr. Dyhrberg, I'm conscious that Mr. Harding is waiting, chomping at the bit. I'm going to ask that you're not chomping? We're going to hear from you now then. I want you to be accurate with your assessment of how much time you're going to need. No one has been in the last day and a half, so it's not like an accident to follow here, but no criticism. So.
I think 10 to 15 is still interesting. 10 to 15 minutes.
I'll hold you to 10. Welcome. Look forward. Just going to take a moment because I'm conscious that there's a party that's waiting for the mid-afternoon who actually has people coming in on Teams. So just while you set yourself up. Yeah, sorry, I was just checking. We've got one of the submitters presenting has got a person coming in by a team. I wasn't sure about his availability, whether that was constrained. It's seemingly not so much, but I'm going to hold you to your 10 or so minutes. Welcome. Take all the time you need, provided there's no more than that.
Oh,
apologies.
Mr. Chairman, members of the panel, Peter Dyhrberg is my name. I'm resident at 118 Chester Street, which is in the heritage area proposed for that locality. And indeed, the elderly building that I've been inhabiting for a long time is seen as a declining site. And I've, in the last 12 months, been in the process of having it earthquake repaired and some modifications or system with it was also consent allowed for the minor adjustments. So I've lived in the inner city itself since 1976, Chester Street, where I am now, since 1983, and I've been a proprietor there since 1989. I strongly support the proposal for the heritage area, and I submit that having an allocation of such areas is very important in terms of promoting a city with its own points of difference, its own distinguishing characteristics. So that's from the broader point of view, but it's also very important in my submission that the significant areas and buildings of historical interest are retained as contributors to an overall hallmark that produces a distinctive sense of place in terms of Christchurch as distinct from other cities in New Zealand and further afield. So there are two angles to this in my submission. One is an angle that has economic advantages. So if there's a distinctive sense of place and character, this is going to be relevant to visitors and tourists, to some potential investors, and certainly to potential residents who might want to move, for example, from other parts of New Zealand to South Island, or quite a bit of that happening already. So it's important from that point of view, and that is an angle that has some economic relevance. But there are also distinct social advantages in that the inhabitants of the city, if these areas are looked after, are provided with and assisted in deriving from where they live their own sense of place and identity. And it's worth noting that in the Chester Street area, there has developed a very strong sense of identity with that particular part of the city, and that sense of identification, in my experience, goes hand in hand with an appreciation for the heritage characteristics. When we first had a pre-plan change meeting with the council, I was quite stunned. We had a big meeting in the Baptist Church Hall, and I was quite stunned to learn that the people who lived in the area and came along to the meeting were very devoted to the notion of living in that particular part of town. So the characteristics are obviously quite a draw and help to create a sense of community. It's worth pointing out, I think, that in the part of Chester Street that's in the first block, there are 2 blocks. We go 1.5 through to Dawson Street from Madras to Dawson Street. But in the part between Madras and Barbados, there have been quite a significant input and investment by residents there in the places that they have. So 106 is 110, which is a double site, which was formerly the home of Colonel James Dyhrberg Brett, who set up he came here from India and set up the waterways system in Kerwee, apparently. So there's the heritage value in the building, but also there's a social history of significance. Then 114's had a lot of attention, 118. So post-earthquake, extra attention, but all consistent with retaining character and the early characteristics of that part of the road. Then, since the council has notified the proposal for the heritage area between 118, where I live, and the corner with Barbados Street, I think 2 or 3 cottages which were in fairly ordinary state, are being worked on and upgraded. One's being repiled and reworked by the owner, all in a way that pays appropriate homage to the early characteristics of those buildings. So it would appear that the proposal to have a heritage area has itself led to some further input and effort by private enterprise. So that's the main reason I'm here, to indicate support and some of the factors that are involved in keeping the heritage area going. I'm aware that not only in relation to Chester Street, but with heritage areas more generally, there's quite a bit of opposition by some organisations, institutions, enterprises who have considerable clout in terms of the argument about the plan change. So I think it's important that those of us who want to have these heritage areas pipe up and make it very clear that there is a strong support for it. There's one area that's caused me a bit of distress, and this is these are my closing remarks. At an earlier point, there were some features of the proposal which I think have since been withdrawn by the council. And I suppose what I want to say is that my understanding is that the allowance by law for qualifying matters is a particular opportunity that allows for different rules to apply in the areas where the threshold of a qualifying matter comes into play. So in particular in the inner city, this means there's an allowance for a departure from the requirements for quite extensive intensification. Over the back fence of these properties I'm talking about, 13 stories is permitted. Not to say it's going to happen tomorrow, but it's a pretty daunting prospect. So the allowance is there for the different rules. And my understanding is that in the earlier proposal by the council, the difference in the rules that applied to the heritage area were greater. They've now been reduced. So the allowance for what can be done on a site, I think, is more liberal than it was at the beginning. But my submission really is that the greater the difference in the rules for the heritage area, the more it is likely that the heritage characteristics will survive. And one very obvious fact that comes into play is that as the difference in the rules